All right, I will say good morning, a good chodesh, a good tavach. It is such a schus Baruch Hashem to be able to begin this new week together in a beautiful Masechet of Basra. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors, our annual Talmud Torah sponsor, Tavshin Pei, the Tilson Mishpacha for dedicating all the Sherman Drashos this year as a zechus for Besaros Tavos for Am Yisrael. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, the last day of the month of Cheshvan, Stephen Terry Zin, in honor of the birth of their granddaughter Dvara Eliana Zin, and creation of the yard site of Steve's father, Bunim Tzvi Ben Chaim. Shmuel Rabin Karapkin, in the Schus Refuah of Rabin's cousin serving in the IDF, Binyamin Chaim Pesach Ben Moshe Chana, and creation of the yard site of Rabin's mother, Pesa Mira Bas Chaim. And Dr. Moshe and Ellen Gevant, in memory of Dr. Gevant's parents, Yaakov Meir Ben Moshe Leib, and Shena Bas Abba, and Dr. Bezad and Yemina Salfer of Los Angeles, in the merit of a Refuah for Esther Bracha Bas Chaya. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos have an aliyah, the families in Nechama, those who need a refuah, should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. We should be Zochem Eretz Hashem to see our hostages come home b'shalom and b'karov. Our holy soldiers should be successful b'chol ma'aseh yedayim. And we should be Zochem Eretz Hashem to a brand new month of Besaros Tavos for Klal Yisrael. Let's do with that. Let us begin. So today's daf is Kuf Nun Tes. Eretz Hashem, we are going to finish the perek today. This is very, very exciting, and what a way to finish off the month of Cheshvan, finishing off Eretz Hashem a perek, beginning Eretz Hashem the first day of Kislev tomorrow with the new perek. Exciting days ahead. So we are picking up on Kuf Nun Ches Amud Beis. Let's just pick up very quickly. Shalchu mitam. We actually left off 4 lines for the bottom. Let's just go back to the 2 dots because I want to tie something in. Amr B'Smaloi, Ada Amra Ben Azai Talmud Chava Hava de Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say 158b at the 2 dots. Remember again, the Mishnah recorded a conversation between Ben Azai and Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara picks up over here on the nature of the interaction between Ben Azai and Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara says, Amra B'Smaloi, Ada Amra. So Rabbi B'Smaloi said, Ada said as follows, Amra Ben Azai, Talmud Chaver Rabbi Akiva Hava. Ben Azai ultimately again was a Talmud Chaver. Talmud Chaver is a unique relationship of someone who learned under someone but then became a peer. So I guess what we would call it is like a student peer. So it's clear that Ben Azai began as the student also, though we did it on Shabbos and do it again, a Mazel Tov to Ramat Marks on the birth of twin grandsons on Erev Shabbos, Baruch Hashem. We celebrated Baruch Hashem, incredible. And Moshe David Artman, the birth of a son on Shabbos, Baruch Hashem. Did I miss anything? There was one more. Shmuel Frankel, who better start coming to Daf Yomi now that we wish him a Mazel Tov here on the birth of bris of his son Yoshua, Baruch Hashem, this past Thursday. Baruch Hashem, incredible. Continued Simcha Eretz Hashem. All right, so the Gemara says as follows. So Rabbi Smaloi said, in the Ado said that Ben Azai is a Talmud Chaver. So we'll say Ben Azai started as the Talmud. He started as the student of Rabbi Akiva, but he very quickly progressed to the status of a peer of Rabbi Akiva. How do we know this? So the Gemara says, the Ka'amar le Shebasa, because again, he referred to Rabbi Akiva in the first person. He said, you came. So the fact that Ben Azai referred to Rabbi Akiva in the first person, not the third person, right? Normally Ben Azai would have said, Rabbi Akiva came, the Rebbe came, the Rav, whatever it might be. The fact that he referred to him in first person indicates that halacha l'maisa, they had a peer relationship and not a Rebbe-Talmud relationship. Now we'll see why that's important in a little bit. I'm going to save it for later because I want to make sure we get through the daf. So the Gemara says as follows, Shalchu mitam, Ben Shalava, so they sent from there. They sent the following question from Eretz Yisrael. Ben Shalava b'nichsei aviv, b'chai aviv umeis. So the Gemara is going to, at first glance, the Gemara is going to highlight this question or bring down this case that is not going to make that much sense. If it doesn't make sense, it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's because the Gemara is going to question the case doesn't make sense. So Ben Shalava b'nichsei aviv, which literally means a son borrowed against the property of his father, b'chai aviv, while his father was alive. Umeis, and then the father died. The son has the ability to extract the property from purchasers. So the Gemara says, "V'zuhi shekasher b'dinei mamonos." So ultimately, and this is a very difficult halacha to comprehend in monetary law. The Gemara says, "What are you talking about? Lava, my mapik. What do you mean? I understand that the son borrowed money against his father's property, but what are you talking about that he extracts from purchasers? What's the case? V'od lukuchos ma'avidite." Furthermore, who said anything about purchasers in this case? Ella itmar hachi itmar. Top of Kufim Desbos, 159a. Rather, if you want to explain the case, here is the case in question. Here we go. Ben shemacha benichse aviv bechaye aviv. So listen to this. A son went ahead and sold his father's property while his father was alive. In other words, the son was an inheritor, right? So essentially what he did is like this. Obviously, when his father's alive, he can't sell property, but he could sell a future right? One day, right? So if you can imagine for a moment, so Reuben says, one day my father Yaakov is going to die. When he dies, I'm going to inherit the property. So I'm selling that right of inheritance. So Ben Shemacha b'nichse b'chay aviv umeis, and then his son died. So what's the halacha? His son, in other words, the deceased son's, Reuven's son, has the ability to go ahead and extract the property from the purchasers. And this is a complicated halacha to comprehend in monetary law. But why should the son be explicit? Imagine for a moment you have Yaakov, Reuven, and Chanoch. Right? Reuven has a son, Chanoch. So again, what happened? Reuven sold off property, his father's property during his lifetime. Then Reuven died. So now the Gemara seems to be saying that Chanoch, the grandson, could come and extract the property from the purchasers. But the Gemara says, why? Why? In other words, if we imagine Chanoch comes to the purchasers, why can't the purchaser say to Chanoch, what are you doing here? Your father sold it to us. Why are you extracting it from us? So the Gemara says, my kusha, why is that such a problem? Dilma matzi amar mikoach avua da'aba ka'asina. Chanoch could say, no, now that my father died, I am the inheritor. In other words, now that my father died, there's one more piece in the story. After the father died, then Yaakov, the grandfather, dies. Chanoch, the grandson, could say, I have the ability to extract property because I am now the inheritor of my grandfather. Teda d'chsiv, the pasuk says, Tachas avosecha yihiyu banecha tishisemu l'sarim b'chal haaretz. So we'll say the Gemara quotes the pasuk from Tehillim. Tachas avosecha yihiyu banecha. So literally, instead of or under the fathers will be the sons. Now the Gemara understands this to be over here that halacha l'maisa, a reference to the idea that grandsons have the ability to inherit their fathers. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. So the Rashbam says, Teida, Techanoch ben Ruven Yoresh es Yaakov Zekeno, Shalomi Koach Ruven. So I'll say, so it's interesting. We've always assumed that the power of a grandson to inherit is because the grandson stands in the place of the son. Right, so if you have Yaakov, Reuven, and Chanoch, so ultimately, again, Reuven's entitlement of inheritance really comes as a derivative of his father's. But now what the Gemara is suggesting is that's not true. A grandson has his own power of inheritance. Look at the Rashbam again. Teida, the Chanoch ben Reuven, Yoresh es Yaakov Zekeno, Shalomi Koach Reuven. That Chanoch, the grandson, again, assuming that Chanoch's father Reuven, who is the son of Yaakov, Yaakov predeceased his father. So Chanoch, the grandson, inherits, but he inherits of his own right as a grandson and not by dint of his father's right. So the Rashi points out, Rashbam points out, Tachas avosecha yubanecha, l'Ruven kamar, Tachas avosecha dahainu Yaakov yubanecha, dahainu Chanoch midlo ksiv tachtecha yubanecha. Eli kashef. Therefore, the Gemara says that's not such a crazy case. Therefore, if halacha l'maisa, in other words, Reuven went ahead and sold off property that he would technically inherit, right? But remember again, Reuven never inherited. Why did Reuven never inherit? Why? Because he died before his father. Reuven died before his father Yaakov. So now, when Yaakov dies, Chanoch, the grandson, has the ability to extract the property from the purchasers. Why? Because Chanoch could say the sale never took place. Because the sale was predicated on grandfather Yaakov dying before Reuven inheriting, and then Reuven having the ability to honor the sale to you. But my father Reuven died before his father Yaakov, Therefore, again, Reuven died. Then Yaakov dies. I, now Chanoch, am the inheritor. Because I am the inheritor, my right of inheritance trumps your sale that my father Reuven made to you. So the Gemara says, okay, it's a little bit convoluted, but it's not complicated to understand. So the Gemara says, you're right. Kasha. So let's say, remember again, just to show you what we're looking for over here. The Gemara records a statement. And the statement was, they sent from Eretz Yisrael that there was a particular case in Dinei Mamanis, in monetary law, that was difficult to comprehend. We're trying to figure out what that case was. Maybe this is the complicated case. So the Gemara says as follows. Ben Bechar Shemachar Chelek Bechora Bechaye Ovid. So we'll say, so maybe there's the following situation. Right? Is a ben b'char shemacha b'chelek b'char b'chay aviv. So this is this case. Let's go with the same family tree. Right? We have Yaakov, father, Reuven, son, Hanoch, grandson. So then what happened? So we'll say, so now ben b'char. So Reuven, let's say Reuven's a b'char. And what did Reuven do? He sold his firstborn right while his father was alive. So essentially, what he's selling is a future. Right, so Reuven says, I'm one day going to be a b'char. I'm going to get Pisha and the double portion. So I'm selling my double portion for, I'm selling the future right to my double portion. Okay. What happened? Reuven died. Now Reuven left behind his son. So Reuven's son Chanoch could go ahead and extract from the purchasers. And this is a difficult halacha to comprehend the Dinei Mamanis. You understand why this works. So understand, Reuven sold his right. So why should Chanoch have the ability to extract it? Like, in other words, the Gemara is asking this question. If Reuven sold it, why does Chanoch have the ability to take it away? Or maybe you'll say, maybe Chanoch will say, no, because my right doesn't come from my father. My right comes from my grandfather. And since by the time that my grandfather Yaakov died, my father Reuven was already dead, therefore I am the inheritor. I inherit the right. And therefore, again, I have the ability, my right trumps the purchasers. Which the Gemara says, no. If Hanoch's right comes from his grandfather, then what chances does Hanoch have for a double portion? Right? The double portion is a din in the biological bechar. In other words, even if you want to say that a grandson has a unique right of inheritance directly from his grandfather, it's independent of the grandson's father, at the end of the day, the grandson has no right to Bishnaim, he has no right to a double portion. Right? Because again, that's a din in the bechar. My kasha, what's the problem? My kasha, Doma Matzi Amar, Mikoa Avod Abba Kasina, B'Makuk Av Kamina. Maybe Chanoch can say like this. In reality, my ability to inherit ultimately again comes from my grandfather. In other words, I have a right to inherit from my grandfather, but I do stand in the place of my father as well. In other words, there's two entitlements over here. Number one, I have the ability to inherit from my grandfather. Number two, in the absence of my father, we saw in the Masechta that I inherit my father's inheritance position. So therefore, my father was entitled to Bishnaim. I'm entitled to Bishnaim. So really, I'm coming at this from two directions. Number one, as a grandson who has the ability to inherit his grandfather, but also as a son who stands in the position of his father. Ela ikasha hakasha. Rather, again, if you have a question, here's the question. Or if you want to find a complicated case, here it is. So by the way, I just want to point out, what's interesting about these cases is we are accumulating a number of individual facts along the way. First of all, this concept that a grandson has a halachic right of inheritance separate and independent from his father's position. In other words, what we were always operating up until now is a grandson inherits his father's position, right? So in other words, if Reuven died, so Reuven's son Chanoch inherits Reuven's inheritance position vis-a-vis Yaakov, the grandfather. So father Reuven predeceases his father Yaakov. When Yaakov dies, Reuven's son Chanoch, Yaakov's grandfather, is going to inherit him. We see now that there's really two elements of that inheritance. Chanoch, the grandson, there's a specific right of a grandson to inherit. In addition to that, the son always inherits the inheritance position of his father, right? So in other words, when Reuven dies, so Hanoch take his position in the inheritance line as well, which means if Reuven was entitled to Pishnayim, then what? Hanoch will now get that Pishnayim as well. It's interesting. Kasha hakasha. Rather, again, I'm going to say, if you want to look for a complicated case, here it is. Not that we're looking for a complicated case. Right? Like, no, it's fine, actually. We're good. So Gemara says, here's the complicated case. This is actually very interesting. Hayodelo eidos b'shtar achlo nasa gazlan. So we'll say, listen to this. Imagine the following situation, right? Reuven was an aide in a shtar, right? So Reuven witnessed the transaction between Shimon and Levi, right? So Reuven was one of the witnesses. Reuven put down his signature in the shtar, and this was before Reuven became a thief. He used to be a good guy, right? Right before he became a thief. Vinasa Gazlan, then he became a thief, right? Now what's the issue with a Gazlan? A Gazlan is not kosher la'edos. Right, is not kosher for testimony. So once you have a very interesting case over here of someone who signed on a document as a witness while he was still an upstanding, credible person, then became a thief, lost his credibility. So we'll say, so now what does the Gemara say? Hu eino meid al ksav yado, aval achirim meidin. So we'll say, so now watch this. So now we have this shtar between Shimon and Levi, right? And the shtar says that Shimon lent Levi $10,000. So now what happens? So now you want to certify the shtar, kiyum shtaros. How do you certify a shtar? You testify that the signatures are legitimate. What's the easiest way to certify signatures? Easiest way? Right? Ask the witnesses themselves. What's the problem over here? Reuven, one of the witnesses, is a thief. So the Gemara says he cannot certify his own signature, right? But others could certify his signature. So the Gemara says, what? Hashta ihu lo mehemen, achrini mehemni? It's so strange. So Reuven is not believed to certify his own signature, but someone else is believed to certify his signature. V'zoi sheshaninu, v'zoi shekasha b'dinei mamanis. And this is a complicated halacha in dinei mamanis. The Gemara says, I don't understand. My kasha, what's the big deal? Dilma kigon shehochzuk ksav yodo bebezdin. Maybe we're talking about a case over here. No. Where Beis Din already had Reuven's signature on file. In other words, we'll say, the way it must have worked is that there were certain people who were always available to be Eidim, right? And therefore, again, certain signatures that Beis Din itself recognized. So that if the shtar was contested, you came to Beis Din and said, oh, that's Reuven, we recognize Reuven. So maybe that's the case over here. Maybe that's the case. Eli Kish Mosai, I just want to point out the tremendous Musar Haskell in this case. So you hear this case? Reuven signed on a shtar, right? Shimon lent Levi $10,000. Reuven was one of the witnesses, right? So Reuven signed on it. Then Reuven became a thief. So now what's the halacha? Reuven can't certify his own signature, but someone else can. But I will say, what is amazing? What is amazing? That Reuven's signature on the shtar is still valid. See, I'm going to float what? Once Reuven becomes a gazlon, maybe what? Everything, even retroactively, is invalid. Kamashman, what do you see from here? You see that even when a person makes dramatic mistakes in life, the dramatic mistakes of the present do not undo the goodness and accomplishment of the past. This is so incredibly important on a number of different levels, but most of all for ourselves. People say, how often does it happen that and this is such a good lesson to really ingest on Rosh Chodesh. How often does it happen that we start and we're on a good streak, right? And I'm firing on all cylinders, and Baruch Hashem, my ruchnius is where it needs to be, and I'm keeping in check certain averos, certain taivas that I struggle with, and everything is going well. And then what happens? I fall off the wagon. And I repeat my mistakes, and I fall back into the same traps, and I'm committing all of the same averos, and I lose my spiritual esteem. And we often think to ourselves, you know what? Anything I did in the past was worthless. Look, I'm right back where I started. So all of that good, all of that positivity, all of that great traction, it obviously means nothing because I'm right back where I was. Kamash Malon, Kambas Basra, Kof Nun Tessa, the elephant says, no, that's not true. The good that a person accumulates and the good that a person performs, that is locked in for you forever. Reuven became a Gazlan, okay, so Reuven now is compromised from this point forward. forward. But the fact that he's compromised now does not go ahead and undo the good that he has done in the past. It is so incredible. I will say, and we see this all the time in our relationships with people, right? Sometimes people do things. Sometimes people do really bad things, and they do bad things now. We say, you know what? Now that you did something bad now, that must show that all of the good you did until now is worthless also. It's not true. People make mistakes, people make terrible mistakes, people do terrible things. But sometimes the terrible things of the present do not undo the greatness and beauty of the accomplishments of the past. Just because Reuven became a Gazlan now does not mean that everything he did up until this point was treif as well. It's true with others, and it's true with ourselves. Incredible Gemara. Someone says, Ela ikasha akasha. Rather, again, if you have a question, here's your question. Here's the complicated case. So I'll say this is an interesting case. Let's say, same thing. Reuven testified on behalf of something to do with Shimon and Levi, right? A piece of property that Shimon was dealing with. And Reuven was an aid on the shtar. Now, at the time that Reuven testified, Reuven had no shaykhus to the property, right? Through a series of confluence of events, Reuven now is in line to inherit the contested property. So now they call upon Reuven to certify his signature on the shtar. The problem is you can't give eidos if what? You can't give eidos if you're an ogea b'davar, right? If you have an involvement, if you have something to gain, obviously you lack credibility. So in this case over here, interestingly enough, so Reuven knew testimony for Shimon, and he signed on a document. Before Reuven had anything to do, he was not in the inheritance line for this property. So now, when the document needs to be certified, Reuven's in the inheritance line. So what's the issue? So again, Reuven cannot certify his own signature, which makes sense, right? He can't certify his own signature because he's an ogea b'davar, but others do have the ability to certify his signature. And the Gemara says, "My kushya." So again, I will say, so now you'll say to yourself, that's so strange. Reuven can't certify his own signature, but other people can? So strange. No, maybe the case over here is where halacha l'maisa, again, they had Reuven's signature on file. So they didn't need him or anyone else for that matter to certify because they already knew it. All right, as well as say, all we're trying to do is for some crazy reason we're trying to look for a more complicated case that no one could understand. So here's the complicated case no one could understand. No, this is a great case. Reuven knew testimony for Shimon, right? And he signed on a document on behalf of Shimon. Then what happens? As luck would have it, Reuven ends up marrying Shimon's daughter. So now the document is contested. They need to certify the document. The problem is now when they need to certify the document, Reuven is Shimon's son-in-law. He's a karov. He's a relative. As a relative, he's not believed to give testimony. So again, Reuven, I will say, remember, the fact that he's related now doesn't in any way undermine the authenticity of the shtar, because the shtar was already made earlier. The issue just is when we need to certify the shtar, Reuven can't certify his own signature, interestingly enough, because he's a karov, because he's a relative to Shimon. Even though, again, he would be certifying his signature about a transaction that occurred long before he was ever related to Shimon. Okay? So the Gemara says, it sounds so strange. So the Gemara says, so once again, the Gemara is just intrigued by this idea that Reuven himself is not believed about his signature, but yet other people are. So why don't you say the same thing over here? What's the case over here? The case over here is where halacha l'maisa, they had Reuven's signature on record. It was already on record in Beis Din. I've Hamrav Yosef Bar Yomi Amrav Nachman. Afapishlo Hochsak Ksav Yado beBeis Din. Rav Nachman said that this is true, right? In other words, this halacha applies even where they didn't have Reuven's signature on record in Beis Din. Umay kushya. So therefore again, so what's the novel ruling over here? So the novel ruling over here is Reuven testified, Reuven signed his document, his name and a document on behalf of Shimon. Fine, no problem. Then later on, Reuven becomes Shimon's son-in-law. Then the document needs to be certified. By the time he's certified, Reuven's related to Shimon. So what's the halacha? Reuven can't certify his own signature, but other people could come and testify that it's Reuven's signature. So the Gemara says, oh, this is a halacha that is so strange. So strange. Again, and why is it strange? Because Reuven himself cannot attest to the validity of his own signature, even though Reuven is kasher v'yasher, right? He's fit, but he obviously related to Shimon, but someone else could come and testify about his signature. So the Gemara says the Bava is incredible. Umay kushya. I don't understand why is this such a big deal. Dilma gzeras melachi. Di'ihu lo mehimin v'achrini mehemni. The Bava is incredible. Maybe this is what we call a gzeras hamelach. What's the gzeras hamelach? Gzeras hamelach says that Ribono Shel Olam said so. And what did HaKadosh Baruch Hu say? HaKadosh Baruch Hu said relatives can't testify about each other. That's it. That's it. The Gemara says, V'la mishum de meshakir. And by the way, it has, say, before we go on, if we were to ask, right, if we were to ponder, why can't relatives testify for each other? Why not? Why not? Because they're going to lie for each other. The Gemara says, maybe not. Maybe it has nothing to do with lying for each other. The Gemara says, "V'la mishum de meshaker." Di'ilo temach. Listen to this. Moshe ve'Aaron lechasnam. Right? You want to say Moshe ve'Aaron? Okay. Moshe ve'Aaron lechasnam. Right? So Moshe and Aaron. By the way, if Moshe Rabbeinu signed on a shtar for Yisro, right? And then what happens? The shtar was contested. And the Beis Din calls him Moshe. Is that your signature? And like, oh no, Moshe Rabbeinu can't certify his own name in a shtar for Yisro. Aaron can't go ahead and certify his name in a shtar for a Shana Bosai. Are we concerned that Moshe is going to lie for Yisro, or that Aaron's going to lie for us? Are we concerned about? Are we concerned about this? Of course not. Gemara says, "Ela gzeras melechu shelo ya'idu lahem, hachanami gzeras melechu shelo ya'idu al ksav yado lechasno." He will say, it's not complicated to understand. There are certain things Chosh Baruch Hu says you can't do it. Why? Because Chosh Baruch Hu says, "I'm a Chosh Baruch Hu and I said so." That's the way that it is, right? So therefore, again, what's that halacha? Relatives cannot testify for each other. That's all. That's all. And okay, I understand. Logically, it makes sense to me because we're always concerned that relatives love each other, hopefully, right? And therefore they may be tempted to lie for one another. Kamashon, that's not the reason. Chosh Baruch Hu said that's the way it is, and that's gzeras melechu, and that's the way that it is. And therefore, again, if you take that approach, then again, in this case over here, where Reuven testified, Reuven signed on a shtar on behalf of Shimon, and now Reuven becomes Shimon's son-in-law, they want to certify the document. So the halacha is Reuven can't certify his own signature, but someone else can. Does it sound strange? It does, but that's the way it works. Why? Gzeras melechi, because that's what Chosh Baruch Hu said it's supposed to be. I will say incredible. I'll just point out what a beautiful Gemara to learn in Rosh Chodesh. I will say sometimes the most important thing to inculcate within ourselves in our Yiddishkeit is this mantra, Gzeras melechu. Yiddishkeit is beautiful, and Yiddishkeit has so many different and deep layers of understanding and comprehension. And there is the pshat, and there is the esoteric, and there's the nistar, and there's the nigla, and there's so many different things. But at the end of the day, what's our motivation to do? And really, at the end of the day, it's got to boil down to one thing: Gzeras hamelachu. I am a soldier of the Ribono Shel Olam. I'm a child, but I'm also a soldier. Always ever seen a child and a soldier? Ever seen a child and a soldier? Children question all the time, right? Soldiers get an order, and what do? They obey. They obey. It's not, well, what about this? Or how about this? Or give me this. Or I don't think we need this. Or you're so old-fashioned. Or you're so outdated. Or I have my own hashkafa. Or I have my own approach. Or I have this. Or I think differently. Soldier gets the order, and a soldier goes in and executes. And that's why, again, what represents an existential danger to an army? When soldiers disobey orders. Right? When soldiers disobey orders, then the entire fabric of the army, of the fighting force, of the effectiveness phrase. So yes, we are children to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, absolutely. But the truth is, even before a son, I'm a soldier. Because a son questions. That's what happens. Soldiers obey. And we have to make sure that at the core of our Yiddishkeit is this mantra, Gzeras melechi. The commander-in-chief gives me orders, and it is my job to obey and to execute, really without question. Really without question. His orders come in the form of the Shulchan Aruch. His orders come in the form of Gemara. His orders come in the form of Mishnah. And my job is to learn it, and my job is to execute. Is there room, of course, for questioning? There is. There is. When? after you perform. After I'm doing everything, or as I'm doing everything, there's absolutely the ability to question and to understand, but it's never questioning as to whether or not I need to do this. I have to do it. That's not a question. The question then becomes, I'm doing it, but I'd love to understand it even more. The execution is already there. Gziras melachi. After I am a good soldier, then I have the ability to become a beloved son. Such an incredible Gemara. So the Gemara says, you're right. In reality, the question we had was the first question. The first iteration of what we thought was the complicated case is in fact the complicated case. So we'll say that was the case ultimately again of Ruvain, who sold off his father's property while his father was alive, right? Sold the rights to his father's property. Then he died before his father, and then his son Chanoch outlived him. Then Yaakov, the grandfather, dies. Chanoch inherits Yaakov. And Chanoch has the ability to extract the property from the purchasers. And the Gemara says, but what about the fact that you were saying it's not such a kasha, because at the end of the pasuk clearly indicates that a grandson inherits his father, to which the Gemara says, no, that pasuk in Tehillim might not be talking about inheritance. Rather, what's the bracha in Tehillim? We'll say, what's the bracha in Tehillim? The bracha in Tehillim, or I should say the pasuk Tehillim is a bracha. What's the bracha? That a grandfather should be zochei miras Hashem to see children and grandchildren who carry on in his way. That's ultimately, again, what the pasuk is saying. It's not teaching me a din in inheritance, but rather, again, it's teaching me a din halacha l'maaseh, being zocheh to see dore doros, a beautiful Yiddish nachos. Umi matzis amrit bebracha ksiv. So the Gemara says, are you able to say that it's talking about a bracha on the base? Aval le'inyan din lo, but it's not a halacha. In other words, is this only a din in bracha and not a halacha? So we'll say Kuf Nun Tes is 159b lo. So aval le'inyan din lo. That time we learned. So we'll say it's a great case. I mean, it's not a great case, but nafal habayis alava al aviv. It's not. I want to go on the record. It's not good, right? But it's interesting, right? So the house falls on Yaakov and on Ruvain, right? Alav va'al morishav, or upon him and those he would inherit from. So listen to this. And upon the son, ultimately again, there was an obligation of ksuva, and he also owed money. So Yarshe'av Omra ben Meis Rishon V'achach Meisa'av. So it says, now the creditors obviously want to get their money on the estate property. So what happens? Yarshe'av, the inheritors of the father, they say, Omrim haben meis rishon v'achar meisa'av. So they say the son died first, right, and then the father died. So therefore, again, the creditors have no rights against any of the property. Uba'chov omer, and ultimately the creditors say, ha'av meis rishon v'achar meis haben. No. The father died first, then the son inherited the father, and therefore we, the creditors, have rights to all of this inherited property. So the Gemara says, my love, Yarshei ha'av bini. So are we not talking about a case where, who are the inheritors of the father? Are we not talking about a case where the inheritors over here are actually the grandchildren? And therefore you see that halacha l'maisa, this bracha or this pasuk by Tehillim is not just talking about a nice bracha that grandparents should be zochet to see, grandchildren who are oski b'torah mitzvos, but rather again it's a real halacha that grandchildren inherit their grandfather and morishav achi, and maybe ultimately again the people who inherit him are referring to the brothers. And maybe you'll say that ultimately, again, the grandson doesn't have the ability to say that I come from I inherit directly from my grandfather. Because maybe that pasuk in Tehillim is only talking about a bracha, but not necessarily a halachic entitlement. Kimes haben v'achar mesa'av ma'havi. If the son dies first, and then ultimately again the father afterwards, then what should be the halachic ramification? Neimalahu balchov yerushas avun kashak lino. So ultimately the creditor should be able to say we will take the Yerusha of the father. To which the Gemara says, no. Lo yarsheh av achiv. What does it mean when we refer to those who inherit the father? Those refer to the brothers. Morishav achi davua. The ones who will inherit, those refers to ultimately the brothers of the father, or the grandfather in this case. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. So Bava says, I just want to point out the way we paskin in this case. The way we paskin in this case is that a grandson does have the ability to go ahead and inherit the grandfather, and that is a unique halachic right. But as we said before, the grandson really has this duality, that on one hand, halacha l'maisa, he has a right of inheritance, but also he also goes ahead and takes the inheritance position of his father. Okay, going on to a new case. We'll say, Ben, imo bekever, lahanchil achim min av. So we'll say this is a very interesting case. So imagine the following scenario. You have a mother, we'll call her Rachel. Rachel has one son. We'll call him Yosef, right? Yosef has no other siblings from his mother, but Yosef has other paternal brothers. Right? Paternal brothers, we'll call them Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. Okay, so now Ruvain has no children of his own. So now if halacha l'maisa, Rachel dies, so Yosef will inherit his mother. In this case over here, here's what happens. Yosef predeceases his mother. So here's the shaila. When Rachel dies, do we say that Yosef can inherit his mother in the grave? Now what does that mean? You'll say to yourself, what are the ramifications of inheriting the mother in the grave? So watch this. In other words, do we say that the lines of inheritance remain even posthumously? So that, again, so right, you've got Rachel has a son, Yosef. Yosef has three paternal brothers, Reuben, Shimon, and Levi, right? Because Yosef and Reuben, Shimon, and Levi share a same father, right? Yaakov, but whereas Reuben, Shimon, and Levi come from Leah, Yosef comes from Rachel. Okay, so now here's the shaila. Yosef dies before his mother. When Rachel dies, do we say that technically Yosef still inherits her? Now you say to yourself, what does it matter if Yosef inherits his mother? He's dead. Why would it matter? Because Yosef has no heirs except for his paternal brothers. So maybe we'll say that the laws of inheritance say that Yosef inherits in the grave, and when Yosef inherits, now that he's dead, who does it go to? His paternal brothers, Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. That's the shayla. Ben Maush Yoresh es imo bekeber lahanchil laachin min haav. Could a son inherit his mother in the grave and thereby convey property to his paternal brothers? That's the question. Amrlu Rav Sheshes. Tanisua, we learn this. Ha'av shenishba, the father was taken captive and presumably died in captivity. Umeis bino b'medina, and then his son died. But Medina just means like, in a regular normal place, right? At home. Or uben shenishba, or a son was taken captive, died in captivity, umeis aviv b'medina, and the father died at home. So what's the halacha? So we'll say yarsheh avi yarsheh ben yachloku. So the inheritors of the son and the inheritors of the father have to split the inheritance. The Gemara says, 1 second, hey Chidami, what are you talking about? What's the case? Ile mekidik tani. So we'll say, if you want to say that literally it's just as it's stated over here, hey ninhu yarsheh av, vehei ninhu yarsheh habein. I don't understand. Who are these two groups? Who are the inheritors of the son, and who are the inheritors of the father? Elalav hachikamer. This is what it means to say. Av shenishba umeis. Av shenishba. So I'll say, here's the case. A father was taken captive, and again, the Gemara says, and we assume that he died in captivity. Umeis ben bito b'medina. And then the son of his daughter, his grandson, right? His grandson from his daughter died, first white line, died at home. Or uben bito shenishba, or the son of his daughter, his grandson died, right? Shenishba was taken captive and died. Umeis avi imo b'medina. And then ultimately, again, paternal grandfather died at home. So the Bach changes the gears over, just takes out Ben Bito just to Ben. And we don't know which one died first. So Yarsheh ben Yachloku, the halacha is that the inheritors of the father, inheritors of the son, split it. Because also remember again, because we don't know who died first, so remember again, depending on who died first, that will determine the inheritance chain. So we don't know ultimately, again, who went ahead and died first. first, so therefore again they should split it. Vim isa nihi nami de ben meis bereisha lir selavua dime bekivrei velir sinu laachua min avua. I will say, but if indeed the son died first, then let him inherit his maternal grandfather in the grave, and then let him pass on that inheritance to his paternal brothers. Rather, we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that Allah Lamaisa, that a son does not inherit in the grave to pass on inheritance to his paternal brothers. Now we'll say, the truth is, this is not a chiddush for us. We've already learned this concept before. There is ein Yerusha bekever. There is no such thing as posthumous inheritance. Even though, again, I will say, because what would be the beauty, it sounds strange, what would be the beauty of posthumous inheritance? The beauty of posthumous inheritance is that even posthumously, you could serve as a bridge to get inheritance property from one side of the family to the other. But Kamash Malan, we hold that once you're dead, you cannot inherit. And because you can't inherit, therefore you cannot serve as a halachic bridge to get property from one side of the family to the other. Amar le, Rav Acha bar Menyumin la'Abai. We already learned this. Where did we learn this? Here we go. Nafal Abayis alav v'al imo. So listen to this. So Yosef is in a house with his mother Rachel. The house falls on them and they both die. So the Gemara says, so everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, the respective inheritors, go ahead and split the property. Vim isa nihi nami de ben meis bereisha lar selim bekivrei v'ler suinu lachim yavua. Supposed to say, but again, if we would say that there is Yerusha in the kever, then we should say like this: even if the son died first, even if he died first, let him inherit his mother in the grave, and then let him pass on the inheritance to his paternal brothers. Elav shmamina. Ein haben yoresh es imo bekever lahanchil asa'achen mina'av shmamina. Rather, Rabbi say, so again, here's the takeaway. The takeaway is there is no inheritance in the grave. And therefore, Rabbi say, let me just plug this into this case that we were just talking about. Therefore, again, remember the family tree, right? Rachel has one son, Yosef has paternal brothers, right? They have this, right? Because he has paternal brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. They have the same father, Yaakov, but two different mothers. Yosef comes from Rachel. Yosef comes from Rachel. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi come from Leah. So now what happens? In a regular case, if Rachel were to die, who would inherit Rachel? Who would inherit her? Her son, Yosef. In our case, Yosef dies first. So now the shaila was, is there such a thing as posthumous inheritance? Now, if there was, what would happen? Then, I mean, Yosef would die. Yosef dies. Yosef's dead, right? Then when Rachel dies, what happens? The inheritance goes to Yosef, and now that Yosef is dead, who inherits Yosef? His paternal brothers. But we paskin ein Yerusha bekever. There is no such thing as posthumous inheritance. Therefore, when Rachel dies, who does her property go to? Who does it go to? Whoever her closest surviving living relative is. But it does not go to Yosef, her dead son, and therefore Allah L'maisa will not transfer over to Yosef's paternal brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Beautiful, that's the Allah L'maisa. But we'll say, okay, we got a couple more minutes, let's see what we can get to. Time of Mai, what is the reason for this? Why doesn't inheritance transfer posthumously? Right? Why doesn't it work for the inheritance from Rachel to go to Yosef? Why doesn't it work? Time of Mai, Rabbi Ne'emra Siba Ben, V'nemra Siba Babal. Now, both say the Torah uses the same lashon of tisov. Tisov means, remember again, to transfer. It uses the same lashon of transfer by inheritance of a son, and the same notion of transfer of inheritance by a husband. Just like we know that when it comes to a husband's ability to inherit his wife, it's only if the husband is alive, right? Because if he's not alive, he's no longer a husband, right? So Lamaisa again, so just like lashon of Sibur, it's like the transfer by inheritance by a husband. It only works if the husband is alive. So therefore, again, essentially, we just use the same lashon, just like you use lashon of tasov, of transfer by a husband, and a husband could only inherit his wife while he is alive. So too, again, a son could only inherit his mother while he is alive as well. Incredible. We'll say, by the way, that is halacha l'maisa ein Yerusha bekever. Weiter. Hahu darmei lechavre. Great case here. Great case. Hu darmei lechavre. Nichsei debar sisin mizabnino lecha. Listen to this. Reuven says to Shimon, I bought property from this guy Bar Sisin. I want to sell you this property. So the transaction is for a very specific piece of property. So the Gemara says, Havi chada ara tav mekari debei Bar Sisin. Okay, so Ruvain had a piece of property that was called the Bar Sisin estate, right? They had a nice little sign at the entranceway, right? They said Bar Sisin estate. Okay, Amar le ha lav de Bar Sisin hu. So what happened? So now Shimon assumed that he was buying that piece of property called the Bar Sisin estate. But he says, no, that's not the Bar Sisin estate. Yeah, they call it the Bar Sisin estate, but that's not the estate that I sold you. Right? It's not the estate that I sold you. So as I see here, what happened over here? So Reuven said explicitly to Shimon, I'm going ahead and selling you the piece of property that I bought from Bar Sisin. Reuven has a piece of property called Bar Sisin. Shimon assumed that that's the property that he was buying. Reuven says, no, that's not what I'm selling you. I'm selling you a different estate. I'm selling you something different. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Asala kamed Rav Nachman. So they came before Rav Nachman, because obviously, again, Reuven's claiming he sold him one parcel. Shimon's claiming or feels that he's entitled to a different parcel. So they came before Rav Nachman. Ukmi biadei de lokeach. So Rav Nachman said, the halacha is on the side of Shimon, and therefore Shimon takes the piece of property called the Bar Sisin estate, because he has every right to assume that that indeed is the piece of property that he purchased. Amrli Rav Nachman, Dina Hachi, that's what we're talking about. Hamotzi mechaver lavaraya. I don't understand. So Rav Nachman is awarding it to Shimon. So Rava says no. Shimon is the extractor. We'll say, what's the halacha? Hamotzi mechaver lavaraya. All right, well, so you know what? We'll have to. I know. I feel terrible. You're not going to be able to sleep today or function today. I'm leaving you in the middle of the Bar Sisin. We'll stop over here for today. It's okay. I'll give us a little more meat on the bones. Tomorrow's a shorter daf anyway. Let's say shkoyach everyone. A guten chodesh. Tremendous. Shkoyach everyone. Say what time?
4:25. If you want to have Tashlum.
Oh, what's that? I realized. I'm sorry. There was one more mazel tov. I realized I forgot. Our chaver Elad Hillman, is Elad still here? Elad is a chassan, one of our remote shir chaver over here. A chassan Baruch Hashem, engaged to a girl from Baltimore. First of all, get to know him if you don't know him. He learns with us every single day, but from a distance. Mazel tov, should be zochem. Stand on the chuppah with your kala b'shat tovim mitzlachos. Build the binyan adiyad me'ave esim shanim tovos. Mazel tov. You had another mazel tov. I just couldn't remember which one it was.